Are you tired of failed relationships? Are you ready for something guaranteed to last? Try Bullseye. We never miss the mark. 6 girlfriends, 3 casual relationships, and a list of one-night stands longer than anybody would care to admit. That's when I realized it was for me. Todd Martrosh could be very convincing. He had asked me out for drinks, for what I assumed was a business proposal. I had never guessed that it would wind up becoming a discussion about our love lives. I like to think I've had a pretty good track record when it comes to my exes. None of them were crazy, and every time we broke up, it was for the right reasons, and it was mutual. I kept telling myself that it just wasn't the right time. Todd was trying his best to convince me that time was right now. Chelsea isn't like any other girl I've ever met. We laugh at the same jokes. We have the same goals. It's like we're meant to be, Todd explained. I still don't see how this is any better than Tinder or eHarmony, I argued. The app itself didn't look like anything special. The icon was a bright red heart surrounded by 2 rings, and the sign-up page reminded me of one of those surveys from 16 magazine. I promised him I would give it a try, mostly because he wouldn't stop singing its praises. When I got home, I found that the same was happening on the review page for the dating site. In fact, during the 3 weeks that it had been out, not a single bad review had been made on it. Not a single 4-star review even. People generally all agreed that the app never got their matches wrong. That struck me as odd. 100% customer satisfaction? Guaranteed successful? It had already been awarded Best New Dating Site of 2018 on both Google Play and the App Store for iPhone. Those kinds of statements made it sound like the app was infallible. I have to admit my curiosity was piqued, and I viewed debunking the site as some sort of challenge. I decided to run a test and began answering the questions on the survey in the most obscure way possible. I lied about my age, my looks, even my sex. As I got further, though, the questions started getting more and more specific, asking for experiences, past relationships, that sort of thing. I made up as much as I could and clicked submit. It only took a few moments for their bot to give me a generic thank you message and reassure me that their algorithm was analyzing the results of my survey, and it would take at least 24 hours to come back with a match. I wasn't expecting anything to come of it. Then my results came back. Honestly, I was surprised. The person the app matched me with was perfect. We shared common interests, goals, and they even fit my appearance preferences right down to ideal height. That's why I was shocked. The person shouldn't match me 100%. I had fabricated my answers as much as possible, but it was like the app completely disregarded what I'd said. Somehow Bullseye had shot right through all the bullshit and hit me dead center with the match of my dreams. I debated with myself about how to proceed. How far did I really want to test this? Ultimately, I decided to push forward with my effort to debunk this thing. The developers of the app had designed it so that, unlike other dating apps, you couldn't message each other. Their approach was to have people meet face-to-face first, instead of building preconceptions via text. To arrange the date of your life, you simply input your availability, activity preferences, and spending parameters into the in-app calendar. From there, the app would do the work of planning an itinerary, select a time and date that worked for both parties, and then send a notification of where to be and when, as well as suggested attire. I input the necessary information and waited for the notification. My plan was to scope out the location and my prospective date to see if the person who showed up was in fact the person it paired me with. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about this just felt off, and I wanted to figure out what. With a bit of time to kill before bed, I decided to dig around for more information on the app. There really wasn't much to find, which was kind of expected with the beta. I remembered seeing the app was owned by Veneer Incorporated when I'd skimmed the terms and agreements, but a search for them just brought up some unrelated mythology information. I couldn't come up with anything else to dig into, and it was late anyway, so with that dead end, I shut down my laptop and went to sleep. The next morning I got up and started a pot of coffee. Checking my phone, I didn't see any new notifications, so I grabbed a quick shower and went to my home office. I shot a quick text off to Todd to let him know I'd given the app a try and proceeded to lose myself in work for the next few hours. Todd ended up calling me later to discuss business, and once again our conversation circled back around to Bullseye. "I'm telling you, man, you won't regret it. When is your date? Maybe sometime we could double up with you guys," Todd inquired. "Slow down, dude. I'm still waiting to get the notification for details, so I'm not sure yet, but I'm excited to see what all this is about. Who knows? Maybe I'll meet my Chelsea." I laughed. We switched back in conversation to cover a few last-minute business things and hung up. I'd skipped lunch earlier, so I decided to order in dinner and call it an early night. Just as I sat down to eat, my phone buzzed and alerted the notification chime. I unlocked it to find a message from Bullseye. The notification had info regarding the time and place of my date. Café d'Amore, a perfectly generic French restaurant on a street I'd never heard about. That's where I would allegedly meet my match made in heaven. Having at least a certain amount of experience in the dating world, I developed a routine. Not something I was too proud of, treating each date the same way. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I threw on a shirt, not so fancy I would look like a tryhard, but also nice enough to impress. I checked Bullseye for any new notifications, cancellations, change in venue, that sort of thing, but there were none. Cautiously optimistic, I hailed a cab. Driving myself would be a disadvantage should there be an opportunity for drinks. The place was awkwardly situated close to the outskirts of town, but looked well kept and on the higher end of restaurants and bars. I paid the inflated cab fare and headed inside, checking myself in the window reflection to make sure I looked decent. It wasn't the largest place I'd ever seen, just about 10 tables scattered around inside, far enough apart so that a private conversation could be held uninterrupted. It struck me as odd that each table was only meant for 2 people, clearly decorated for romance. A waiter greeted me as I entered, confirmed that my booking was made through the Bullseye app, and informed me that my date had already arrived. Each table was occupied by 2 people, all seemingly on a date, impeccably dressed. The waiter escorted me to one near the back, only one with a free chair. I knew she was my date even before she introduced herself. "Hey, I'm Isabel," she said as she embraced me in a hug. "Sorry, maybe a bit too forward? I'm not really used to these things." "That's all right," I chuckled. "I never mind a good hug." No sooner had I sat myself down at the table before a waiter arrived with drinks for both of us, a White Russian for her and a tequila sunrise for myself, my guilty pleasure favorite. "Did you order these?" I asked. "No, but they somehow got my favorite." She looked over at mine and smirked. "I guess you also enjoyed the fancy drinks, huh? What kind is that?" "No idea how they knew that," I responded, mildly embarrassed. "Hey, no judgment from this side of the table. People should be allowed to enjoy whatever the heck they want." We quickly got to know each other, sharing the usual superficial details about our lives. Truth be told, it felt as if I already knew her. She matched my dream girl to a T. "How did you end up on Bullseye anyway?" "Through a colleague who may or may not be too involved in my love life. Yeah, I know the feeling. Always being pushed out the door. It's funny how the people in our lives think they can live it better than ourselves." In meeting my date, I'd almost forgotten about my initial suspicion. I was simply having too much of a good time. "It's a bit strange though, don't you think?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "Well, I got matched with you pretty much instantly." "So?" "I mean, I couldn't find much information about this app online, except that the company is named Veneer, so it struck me as strange how, well," she paused, "you kind of matched my requirements perfectly." I smiled, a mixture between being flattered, but also how strange it was that she matched my requirements perfectly, despite having to put in nothing but false information. My smile quickly faded. "Sorry, was that too much?" No, it's just that you're right. It's incredibly strange. You also match perfectly." "Really?" I couldn't tell if she was happy or nervous. To be honest, all the personal info I put in my app is false, even my own gender. That being said, there can't be many fish in the Bullseye Sea. I noticed one of the other guests had been staring intently at me while I was talking. As soon as I noticed, he quickly returned to his conversation. "Hey, is that guy staring at us?" she whispered to me. I turned around to get a glimpse of another man quickly redirecting his gaze. It had become oddly quiet in the restaurant. "You sure he wasn't just checking you out?" I joked. She playfully rolled her eyes at me. "I wish. There was a woman earlier who also seemed a bit too interested in our conversation." "Yeah, I noticed someone else as well." At that point, the music had fully come to a halt, and people were no longer sipping their drinks, but quietly whispering about something. The waiter approached our table with a new pair of drinks and an assortment of canapes. "These are on the house," he said, "as a thank you for volunteering with Bullseye." "What do you mean Before I could finish my question, the waiter had returned to the front desk. "I feel like we're being pranked or something," Isabel said. "Yeah, maybe," I responded, not fully convinced. An uncomfortable knot had started developing in my stomach. Something was very wrong. But my gut is telling me something is going on here, and it'd be a good idea for us to get out. I stood from my chair as Isabel glanced around at the other diners, who now all had their full attention on us. I could see a look of unease washing over her face as she began to rise from her own chair. "Hey, come on, just relax. Everything is on the level, I promise. You do still trust me, don't you?" A familiar voice came from behind, and I turned to find myself face to face with Todd. "Look, how long have we been friends now? Do you think I would steer you wrong? I wouldn't have recommended Bullseye if I thought there was anything to worry about." He was dressed up in a nice white tux with his hair slicked back and a smile spread wide across his face. "Listen to him, Isabel. You can have what Todd and I have been blessed with, real, genuine love. I promise, the ceremony is perfectly safe," a woman said out loud behind Isabel. "Chelsea, why are you here?" Isabel responded. As soon as I heard Isabel speak that name, I knew it couldn't possibly be a coincidence that Todd and I had been matched with two women who were also friends. Todd and Chelsea began moving toward our table as they were joined by all the other cafe patrons who had left their seats. "What's going on here?" I asked Todd, demanding an explanation. I stood up to confront him, and then he suddenly grabbed my shoulder and forced me back into my chair. "Please, I told you there is no need to worry. Everything is perfectly fine. After the ceremony, you two lovebirds will be together forever." The way he said it told me that was not something I wanted to be a part of any longer. I did the only thing I could think of and told Isabel to run. She didn't have time to respond as we were close to being surrounded. She simply rose from her chair and spun toward the door in a single motion, and I followed closely behind. I could see now why we'd been seated near the back. We had to somehow slip past almost every person there to make an escape. I was honestly impressed by how far Isabel made it before they had pinned her down. She was almost to the hostess booth when someone tackled her. I barely made it half as far myself before I was also taken down and dragged back to our table. Then the group started to chant. "You were found worthy and chosen for the ceremony. You are destined for each other. We never miss the mark." Chelsea rested a hand on Isabel's shoulder, and I just barely realized what was happening before the syringe in her hand plunged into Isabel's neck. "Hey, what do you do?" Isabel's words trailed off and her head rolled to the side. Todd gave me a look of disappointment. "I really thought you'd cooperate. That is why I picked you when they selected me to find a new candidate. Fortunately, there are ways to make this work." He began to grin wider as he pulled a second syringe from his pants pocket and took a step toward me. Ceremony was the first word that I recalled when consciousness found me. Instinct kicked in, and I began to struggle, expecting to feel the strain of ropes around my wrists and ankles, but warmth and cloth were all that held me in place. I sat up and kicked the blankets away. The room was small and decorated like a 2-star hotel in Middle America. I scanned the gaudy decorations and faded wallpaper as I stepped onto vinyl flooring, made to look like wood paneling. The door, large and the color of steel, was the only thing out of place besides the window to my left, which reminded me of the kind you might find in a police interrogation room. My feet had barely touched the cold floor before 3 things sent me diving back for the covers. Isabel was still unconscious in the bed I'd woken up in. We were both completely naked, and we were being watched. When I was beneath the blanket, Isabel began to stir, and then to panic. "It's all right, we're all right." I tried to sound reassuring, but I don't think it registered. "Where am I?" She looked me in the eyes, and, despite her fear, I could see in her eyes that she was upset with herself for excluding me. "Where are we?" she amended. It didn't take her long before she reached the same conclusions as I, and although we hardly knew each other, she felt compelled to move closer to my body for safety. "Why did they bring us here?" she whispered. I could feel her heartbeat speeding up as we lay there together, confused and scared. I'm not sure, but the best thing we can do is wait and watch for a moment to fight back, I told her. She turned her head so that our faces were close enough for her to probably taste the alcohol lingering on my breath. You're pretty level-headed for someone who's been kidnapped, stripped naked, and put in bed with a stranger. Is this a particularly good time to flirt? I teased. It actually felt good to lighten the mood, especially since we had no clue what might happen next. To be honest, I've been on some pretty shit dates and in some pretty shit relationships. Trust me, I'm terrified, but it's not exactly new territory. This doesn't even rank in my top 5, she responded. That's terrible. I started to turn my head away, but she placed a finger on my chin to stop me. You know, up until they stuck me in the neck, I was having a great time. I feel like I've known you my whole life. She leaned in to kiss me, but before our lips could touch, a loud burst of static filled the room. Covering my ears did nothing to muffle the noise. And when it finally stopped a few moments later, a light behind the two-way mirror came on, illuminating a group of at least 8 behind the glass with Todd front and center.
God damn it, Matt. I told you to fix the speakers before we used this room again. This hasn't been my top priority, as you know, Todd. James told me...
The sound cut out, though we could see the argument between Todd and the technician play out beyond the glass. When they finished, Todd took 3 deep breaths, smiled, and motioned for the microphone to be turned back on. It was a composure tactic I'd seen him do countless times before.
Sorry about that. Now, you two seem to be getting along just fine without intervention. But the sad truth is that you've circumvented the process. Your connection has the potential for flaws, and we can't risk you giving Bullseye a bad name by leaving your relationship up to chance.
This is insane, Isabel yelled. You can't just put 2 people into a room and force them to fuck because your app is flawed.
That's a crude way to look at it, for someone with no idea what they're talking about.
Todd sneered. Jesus, make love then, she laughed. I didn't mean to offend your delicate sensibilities.
You misunderstand me.
Todd made a circular motion in the air. 2 of the men on his left exited the room.
This isn't about sex. It's about creating a connection. It's about ensuring you two will be together forever. If you'd only followed the rules, none of this would be necessary.
A grinding, squealing sound came from the metal door, as if an ancient mechanism was being used for the first time in ages. I put an arm around Isabel as she moved closer. This is real life, not weird science, Todd, I said, though my eyes remained on the door. You can't just create destiny out of thin air.
That's where you're wrong, my friend,
Todd replied with seemingly good intent. We held each other tighter as the door opened at last and flooded the room with light. We held each other tighter, trying to protect each other, even as we sought comfort from each other. Some of the light was blocked by the silhouette of something large, something frightening, something that just couldn't be. As the lights adjusted, I found myself staring at 2 replicas. They looked just like Isabel and I, down to the most intimate of details. It was clear they were in no way human at all, but how they were different from me or my date, I couldn't quite tell you. I immediately stood up and grabbed the replica of myself before pinning it to the wall. It was strong, more well-built than any machine I had ever seen, but still I fought.
As you can see, we have no qualms with simply replacing you should we see fit. But things will go a lot more smoothly if you cooperate with us,
Todd said over the microphone. The bizarre surrogate grappled me and led me back to the bed. Isabel shivered and tried not to cry as the beings intended to take our place stood near ours and held us in place.
Let the ceremony begin,
I heard Chelsea announce. I felt my body give way, like I was being pushed into a dark hole and then left to be buried alive. I grabbed a hold of Isabel's hand and screamed, desperate to find a way to fight this. The whole room shimmered and shook. The beings in front of my body opened their mouths wide, and a radiant light shot out and blinded me. I heard music. I felt my skin go cold, and then, abruptly, another burst of static erupted, and the whole room stopped spinning. The creature stood transfixed, as though suddenly unable to respond, and I looked toward the opposite side of the glass and heard Todd and his allies screaming incoherently. Isabel was unconscious, so I had to lift her into my arms and run toward the open door. Then I saw another figure standing in the hall, urging me to follow. It was Todd again, and suddenly all of this was beginning to make sense amid my scattered brain. "Follow me if you want to live," he told me. We ran through corridors of what looked like an abandoned movie studio, a massive storage unit filled with dangling suits that appeared to be made of skin, other replicas that were just waiting to be filled for their evil purposes. "Don't look forward, just keep going," he urged me. I kept Isabella close to me and ran toward the stairs. A loud, obnoxious blare hit the room again, and we made it outside onto an abandoned country road. Todd joined me a moment later as the whole building began to go up in smoke, and then pushed me toward an unmarked car on the edge of the property. Chelsea opened the door and ordered me to hop in as the building exploded behind me, and I closed my eyes and gave a breath of relief. We drove away down the dirt road, and a few minutes later, Isabel awoke and clung to the seat, surprised by the sudden shift in circumstances. "Can someone please tell me what is going on?" she asked. Todd tossed us a blanket to cover our naked bodies as we drove, and then he told us what he knew about the company that had almost killed us all. They were a cult. They believed they had found the key to unending life and wisdom from a creature they called Veneer. That wasn't its name, of course, but that was the name that we gave it. It promised to fulfill our destiny as humans. All we had to do was just follow its orders, Todd said. We found out soon enough that it wasn't all that it was cracked up to be, but by that time, it was too late. They had amassed a name for themselves and were setting things in motion to take over. Those things we saw, those other versions of you and Chelsea, that was just the beginning, I realized. He didn't say a word, but his silence was all I needed to know that it was true. We were dropped off after Chelsea stopped to get us some fresh clothes, and told never to speak about Bullseye again. A few weeks later, the app disappeared completely, and I returned to my normal life. I tried my hardest to forget about the whole thing and pretend that it was all just a high-strung, drug-induced dream. But each time I did, I would get a notification on my phone from Isabel asking if we could go on another date. Call me a fool for old-fashioned romance, but I finally gave in and even agreed to meet up with her at a Mexican restaurant. The conversation was pleasant, and we both agreed to count it as our first official date. I really want the relationship to work. There's just one thing that is bothering me, though, and maybe I'm just paranoid. But when we were at dinner, Isabel seemed to know exactly the right drink to order for me. Maybe I'm remembering things incorrectly, but I don't think I ever told her what it was. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.